Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Devin Crosby of Lynn University. Leadership is a dynamic occupation that requires vision, excellence, but most importantly, the humility to serve your people on a daily basis. As you lead, make sure to become grounded in something greater than yourself. This will shape your decisions, provide clarity to your team, and cultivate trust. And trust is the foundation of success. Enjoy the podcast.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. This episode of 1Q will be hosted by Brian Blair, Deputy Athletics Director at Washington State University. Take it away, Brian.
Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. This is Brian Blair, and I'm the Deputy Athletic Director at Washington State University. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. I'm joined today by Kelli Zinn. Kelli is the Deputy Athletic Director at West Virginia University. Kelli, thanks for joining us.
Brian, thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in. You're a West Virginia native, a WVU grad, and you've been there over 10 years in your current position. When you think about your career, and so often in this industry, I feel like you have this urge, or people put this urge upon you to hop around a little bit. And you've been there a really long time. I mean, what's the secret to that longevity, and what do you think the value is to it?
Yeah, well, it certainly wasn't the original plan. And, and you've noted a few things that obviously a number of people have touched on during my time here, because I think when you look at me on paper, I am West Virginia through and through. And I think there are absolutely the advantages to that here, in that I bleed gold and blue. And that's fantastic. At the same time, too, I think there's a piece of that where people go, oh my gosh, she's been there a decade plus. But I didn't dial it up that way. Truth be told, when I came in, I was probably on a 3 or 4 year plan at the time. And I thought I would make my way back to West Virginia and do some good things here, and then be on that next juncture in my career. And instead, I think what's transpired is you see a career trajectory where I've grown and developed over the course of a number of years to ultimately assume the top lieutenant role here at West Virginia University. And it's been really difficult for me to find something that gives me that desire to depart. Doesn't mean it hasn't been out there and that I haven't looked at some things, but there's something pretty special here, and it's been, really beneficial for me. So I think the institutional knowledge that I have is a real value for West Virginia and those around me. And there's a lot that goes into that, of knowing what to do, knowing the history of the institution. A lot of people come and go, and they're looking at things saying, well, why was it this way or why was it that? I have a lot of historical perspective on that. So there's some positive things with the amount of time that I've been here.
Absolutely. And I think, you've built one of those brands that I believe throughout the industry. People, your name comes up, the word rock star comes about, or people just say, wow, she's amazing, or she's so awesome. Even the other day, I mentioned to somebody I was interviewing you, and the first comment was, she's amazing. I can't wait to listen to that. So with that in mind, and the time you spent at West Virginia, and obviously an amazing place, what is it that gets you so excited in the morning, or keeps bringing you back to that standard of excellence that you're known for?
Yeah, well, we're constantly striving to get better here. And I think, what's transpired over the number of years since we've gone into the Big 12 is, we really had things really rolling here when we were in the Big East Conference. It's a different day and time. And you look at the league that we're in, and we had a lot of things that we needed to improve upon. We had an infrastructure that needed to get better. We had personnel that needed to be added. We had a real growing phase. And so year by year, I think we get closer to that spot of returning a number of our programs to a place of real prominence and becoming, a steadfast place within a premier program within the collegiate athletics landscape. And I think that's the drive, right? That's what we all shoot for. There are a number of other things that go into it. You want to have people around you who are growing, developing, feeling good about what they're doing. But at the end of the day, we're here for, really successful, competitive, high-powered, exciting sports. And that's for our student athletes, our coaches, our staff, our fans, our donors, you name it. And so if you can't get up in the morning and feel fired up and great about that, then you're in the wrong business, and you're certainly at the wrong place, because that's what we pride ourselves on at West Virginia.
I love it. And that's a place with a lot of passion. I mean, a lot of people don't know this. Wofford played West Virginia. I guess that was my junior year. I'll say this lightly. The fans had a lot of passion, even for the visiting FCS school and the fan base, but it was a remarkable experience. I mean, very special place. And I think one of the things you just touched on is the fact that although the logo, I mean, more or less stays the same, you've got student athletes that come through there every 4 to 5 years, but also the challenges that you guys have been here with, whether it be leadership changes, conference changes, the like, but the standard remains the same. So you're constantly pursuing that standard of excellence. And that's a never ending journey, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no professional sports in West Virginia. So, I spent some time at Maryland. I was in Rhode Island for a number of years and seeing a number of institutions within the conference league. And everybody is kind of up against this saturation of sports that exists. It's us, right? We're the biggest show in town and within the state. And you see that, you feel that, you hear that when you're here, because people are eating, living, and breathing the Mountaineers. And so it's special.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we have in common is we both began our careers in the compliance realm, and have since expanded out into broader leadership, should you say. As you think about kind of where you started and where you are now, I mean, for those listeners that may not be familiar with the kind of in-depth starting a career in compliance and what that may mean to a long-term senior leadership role, I mean, what would you say the value is?
Yeah, well, I think the value is it's the only opportunity within a number of silos that exist within college athletics where you really are connected to all of it. If you take a look at it, it's internal, it's external, it's sports, it's units, it's departments, it's donors, it's the campus community, you name it. Now it's in a role of education and sometimes enforcement and monitoring and all the things that I think for years a number of people have looked at and said, oh gosh, compliance, that's rough. And I think a lot of administrators working in compliance do get to that point in their career where they say, I can't continue to do this, day in and day out, because it's a grind and it's a challenge. You're not always the most, popular person in the room, and you're dealing with some yucky stuff at times. But it is a great foot in the door. And I think it absolutely, as you look across the country and see a number of people as they've risen in the ranks and they've landed in the AD chair, you're seeing a lot more of that background. And for years, people have continued to push fundraising, and that's important. And I'm not taking anything away from any of our development officers or any of that, but how many times, even yourself are in a place where you've got a fundraiser in front of you saying, hey, I really want to be a sport administrator, or I'd like to become an AD someday. I need to learn about college athletics and the department and everything that goes into that. And so in compliance, you start out and that's what you're working in day in and day out. And it's from the top down and you just learn it really quickly. So I would make the argument that while it can be a difficult path to travel at times, depending on the circumstances of the institution, you can also find yourself in a place where you really get ahead of some folks understanding just how this great world of sports works.
Absolutely. And full transparency, I'm biased, right? But
yeah, me too.
Yeah, fair enough. But I think you spoke a lot of truth. I mean, when you walk into a compliance position and you're at that kind of entry level, you're working with absolutely everybody, whether it be your development officers, your head basketball, football coach, whatever coach it may be, all the way to marketing and the business office. So for me, starting out in compliance, and I didn't really know what I was doing when I started out in my career, but what I quickly understood is I had a better understanding of the entire athletic department and how all the pieces fit together. And then I could plot out my career in terms of where I thought my skill set fit best. So that view from the top really helped me. But I think the second piece of it is you learn how to build really, really good relationships in spite of adversity. And I think that's something we have to do as senior leaders and as administrators in college athletics. But with compliance, you're dealing sometimes with having to tell somebody no, or having to tell them, hey, we can't do that right now. But you learn how to, if you're good, I think, you learn how to navigate that with we can't do this, but let's do this. And that's all I do sometimes as a sport administrator. And I'm sure it's the same for you, right?
Absolutely. You figure out really quickly how to say no, but to do so in a way where the relationship remains intact so that they're still working with you and it's constructive, and all of those things. And so 100% it is the one place that if a person can plant themselves, particularly early in their career, I think it really puts you ahead.
Absolutely. I think you and I have a colleague in common, Simon Dover, and he coined the phrase velvet hammer from the CFO role. But it's funny, but it always stuck with me because he had to say no, but he had to maintain those relationships to keep everything moving forward. And I think so much of that is so true.
Yeah, I would argue, the finance folks can use a velvet hammer. Compliance folks, on the other hand, sometimes have to rip that velvet off.
Fair point. Fair point. So, I mean, switching gears and talking, I mean, your career, you've overseen a lot of different units and areas, but one that you have right now that I'm particularly interested in is your football oversight in West Virginia. I mean, what are some of the challenges you've dealt with that you're willing to share with the audience?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, football's a whole different animal, right? And so I think the challenges ebb and flow. I'd say the biggest thing is probably just the arms race that has existed across the country. That we were probably a little bit late to that party for a number of reasons, more so financial related than anything, right? Like I said earlier, talking about leaving the Big East and going into the Big 12. I mean, it was just a completely different landscape for us. And so you're seeing where over the past, 5, 6 years, I mean, we've dumped in over $100 million in brick and mortar and infrastructure upgrades. And the road to construction has always been there. And so, particularly in recent years, I've been heavily involved in the capital project side of things, and managing that. And, there are always, challenges and issues with that piece. We've obviously transitioned into some personnel changes. We hired Neil Brown a couple years ago. Fantastic. I mean, has just been incredible for us. But with any kind of change in regime, you always have those little bumps in the road that you work through. So I think it always has some challenges, but we tend to look at challenges in the midst of opportunities. And they've been an incredible group to work with. And so I think we're on the cusp of something really special here. When you look at what's taken place under Coach Brown's leadership, and then you add to it the fact that coming this summer here is as short of three months out, we're finally going to have the final piece to an infrastructure puzzle that has really been in the works and come to fruition here over the past 5, 6 years. And so to see that all come together and feel really good about having everything here to be successful, it's awesome. So it's hard to focus on challenges when you've got that much opportunity on the horizon.
I love it. I love what you said about embracing those challenges in the midst of being an opportunity. Because I think that viewpoint, that simple switch, is the difference between people that I view as those game changers in the industry. Those people that find those opportunities in the midst of whatever's being thrown at them, rather than the "woe is me" type attitude. And I think football oversight, or being that football administrator, means a lot of different things, different places. Myself, and we hired Coach Rolovich a year ago, working with Pat, working with our president, and kind of making sure that marriage goes along the course as it should. I mean, can you describe a little bit about that relationship between you and Coach Brown, Shane, your president, kind of what your role is between all of those different stakeholders?
Yeah, well, I think at minimum it's to keep a pulse on everything that's going on, but to serve in a way that helps them accomplish all of their goals, right? I think there's a synergy and the expectation that exists from our president to our athletics director to our head ball coach to myself, right? We want to win. We want to do so the right way. We want to serve and develop young men, and create something here that everybody can be really proud of. And so that piece is easy. I think for my role in it, you're working through and trying to, make sure that you effectively deliver what needs to happen in recruiting and finance and capital projects that we talked about, in administration and personnel, so that all those pieces come together to create a really great experience for our student athletes and everybody that's a part of it. but you're handling all those pieces of it, right? There's a scheduling component that sometimes, boils down to putting things on paper and working as many as 10 years out to try and come up with opponents that are going to position you that if you're winning and getting there in the right time in the right year, how does that fare in the eyes of the CFP and all these things? And so a lot of unknowns that you navigate through, and you do that by making the best decision that you possibly can. But at the end of the day, football's paramount. And I think any administrator's role is one where they're working through a lot of things. For mine, obviously, a big piece of that is just making sure it all goes smoothly. And in the midst of that, I'm really fortunate to have a head football coach who keeps me in constant communication with the program. I think in talking with some folks, that's probably a little bit unique relative to some, but it's not unusual for Neil and I to speak every day, sometimes a couple times a day. And that's comfortable for us, and that's normal. And that's just the way that it is. And so I think there's strength in numbers when you work in the midst of leadership and folks trying to just work for the same common goal. And so we're really connected in a way where we're on the same page. And in those instances where we get off of them, right, we have a great relationship where we can agree to disagree, but work for whatever's best for the program. And that's always the ultimate goal.
Absolutely. And I think, that makes me feel better for those 5 a.m. calls I get from Coach Rolovich. I now feel better that I'm not the only one bearing that brunt. But I think you dropped a couple of nuggets there. One, that alignment is just so critical to a program's success. Because, right, we all hire coaches and we have the press conference and we say, hey, now's the time we're going to win. This time's going to be different. But there's pieces that go into that aside from hiring the right individual that just have to be in place for a program to have longstanding success. And that alignment, I believe, is one of the most fundamental for all of us to be pulling in the same direction. That's from head coach to his ops or chief of staff all the way up through sport administrator, AD, and president. When that happens, I think that's where special happens. And I see all too many programs that don't maybe have some of those pieces in place. You just can't plop the head coach there and expect them to do it on their own. Because, teamwork is what we're about in athletics. I think that's a critical piece to football administration.
Absolutely. Well, and I think when you have that too, the highs are even higher and your lows are probably mitigated a bit. Just understanding that everybody's on the same page and working together, and really care and respect one another in a manner where it makes a big difference.
And you said something about helping them accomplish their goals. And I think sometimes it seems like servant leadership is an overused phrase at the moment. And everybody just tosses that onto everything. But to me, that in essence is what it is, right? I'm trying to help, whether it be the football coach, the AD, the president, whoever, be their best version and help us as an organization be our best version. And I think that's what you're touching on there with helping them accomplish their goals and be their best versions.
Well, absolutely. I think when you look around, when people around you have success and people around you are at their best, in the midst of that is yourself, who is seen in the same light, feels the same way, right? And so being able to do that and know that you're working on behalf of a department for the betterment of others, that's only going to position you for the same thing. And I think when you can lead that way and work through that and do so intentionally, it just becomes, that's just the way that it is, right? You're not even thinking about it. You just go out, you do it. That's what drives you. That's your guide. And that's the light that you're following. It seems to work out well here. And I'm hopeful that, people all across the country see it that way.
I think that's the secret to true happiness. And this is one person's opinion, but when your happiness is based in serving and giving to others, then you're not so attached to some of the other factors that people play into their careers, lives, or whatever. We could go on that forever.
Absolutely. Well said.
As you talk about serving, you recently, I guess it's not too recently now, but served as interim AD there at West Virginia. What did you learn during that period about yourself, the role? Did it impact your future career aspirations? I just think this is a period that kind of gets glossed over in the industry, where you have individuals step into that role on an interim basis, and you're having conversations with your president, with the athletic department staff. They're looking for leadership, and you're thrust into this role. What did you bring out of that experience?
it seems like forever now. Maybe not too long ago, but it seems like quite some time. I think when I think back to that, I was 35 years old when I gained that appointment, and so I was not yet in a place ready to sit in that chair. I knew that, and I think for me at the time, the thing that it taught me in that period was not so much task oriented, where I was learning something that I didn't already know. And instead, I came out of it really understanding a few things. One is the value that exists when someone has confidence in another person. And I say that because, again, going back to the ripe age of 35 and having a president in front of you appointing you to that seat, I was nervous about it. And I remember going into his office and having that conversation. Sort of at the time, you're never ever going to show that, right? I would never sit in front of a president and give any inclination that I was nervous or anxious about something. And instead you're saying, I can do this, right? Seize the moment.
Absolutely.
But truth be told, I was nervous about it. And I remember as that conversation continued, I saw a president, a man in front of me who I had the utmost respect and confidence in. And he never once wavered or showed any concern or asked any questions of me that led me to believe that he didn't think I wasn't 100% ready and capable to serve in that role. And that's all I needed. And when I left there that day, I wasn't nervous about it anymore. And I wasn't anxious feeling like, oh my gosh, am I in over my head? And instead, because of his confidence in me, I had the confidence to go do that job. And that wasn't just a great moment for me, because it helped me to realize that I can have confidence in myself and be ready for things that maybe I might overthink and think that I'm not. But instead, what impact I could have to some other people in similar circumstances, whether that was at the time or throughout my career. And so I learned really quickly and in a true moment what it means for us as leaders, as people in positions of authority, to show that confidence to other people. And that could really change their future or change their trajectory, or even if just for that day, it changes their circumstance and the confidence they have in themselves. We can all do that. And so that was probably my biggest takeaway, because having lived it with him and what that meant for me, I know that I can now do the same for others. And sometimes it's as simple as having a conversation or just showing them that you have the utmost faith and confidence in them to do the job, whatever that job is.
Kelli, I absolutely love that. I mean, we just finished talking a little bit about helping others accomplish their goals, the value of servant leadership. But I think that example you just gave, it's one of those things. Sometimes we don't really think about it as much, but to instill that confidence in somebody else, because we talk to our athletes all the time, right? Mm-hmm. About being confident, about stepping on the field, knowing you're prepared to win at whatever sport you're talking about. But sometimes I think we forget those lessons when we step into a suit or an office and have these conversations with our colleagues, and just saying to somebody, I believe in you, how much that can impact their ability to actually do the job that they may be doubting themselves.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you think about it and you see all the times where, and hey, look, we all love a great underdog story, right? But I think too often, sometimes we see folks who are motivated by the people that doubt them and they're haters, if you will, right? And instead, I long for the day when people are instead student athletes, individuals, coaches, whoever it is, are instead motivated by those people who believe in them, who have empowered them, because that's so much more positive, number one. And number two, I think if you really sat down with most people and took the time to say, what is your motivation and why are you doing what you're doing? It probably is, in fact, those individuals, right? It might be the cool thing or a great story to say that it's those people who doubted me, who didn't think that I could get here. But in reality, it's probably those who are close to them, who they care for, who have been a bigger part of their life in a way that have helped them to get to that point.
Absolutely. And I hope people, as they listen to this, they're picking up a theme throughout our entire conversation. And it's your people skills. I mean, we've talked about compliance, we've talked about football, we've talked about serving as interim AD, but I think it all comes back to people and relationship, and that's what's made you so special thus far, is your ability to connect and understand and really get a sense on just the fact that you picked up on that in the conversation with the president. There are a lot of people that would sit in that room at that moment and just gloss over the fact that he was instilling that confidence in the moment. And then to pull a lesson from that and something that you can impart on your current staff, that's just really impressive. I'm really impressed by that.
Wonderful. Well, you give me way too much credit, Brian, but I appreciate it.
So, I mean, you were in the interim role and you said, well, I'm 35, I'm not ready. Your president instills that confidence in you. So that draws me to, I guess, my final question. When do you know that you're ready? And
ready.
I ask that a little.
I am ready
we're all in that seat, right?
To anyone who is out there listening. I don't know when exactly it was that I said, okay, if that happened again, right, today, it's a different conversation. I'm feeling differently about it. But yeah, I mean, I think you absolutely get to the point somewhere along the way where you recognize and know that you can do that job, that you're capable of that job, but that you also have the desire and the passion to do that job. And I'm there. It's been, 6 years since I served in that role. And it will forever be one of my, brightest moments in my history. And to think about it from a standpoint of doing so at West Virginia University, that's a blessing. But I think it happens along the way and through experience and through things that you're working with, and just getting to a place where you're comfortable in the role that you would be willing to serve in. And for that one, I'm hopeful that someday I see that happen.
Absolutely. And I have no doubts that's soon on the horizon. So, Kelli, I really enjoyed this conversation. I don't know if our listeners are going to get as much out of it as I did, because I'm fascinated by you. I'm fascinated by your career path and look forward to seeing what next steps you take. Thanks again for joining us.
Brian, thank you, and have a great day.
That was Kelli Zinn, and she is the Deputy Athletic Director at West Virginia University. And of course, this is Brian Blair, Deputy Athletic Director at Washington State University. Thanks for tuning in, and please remember, stay humble, stay curious. We'll catch you next time.
This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.